Before we talk about power, wealth, and boardroom drama, let me ask you this. What if the person everyone overlooked was the one who could save it all? When Billionaires failed, she snatched success from ruin. This is not just a line, it's the shocking truth behind a company's darkest hour. Once a giant of its industry, the firm collapsed into chaos, drowning in debt, bleeding investors, and watching its empire crumble. Experts, executives, and powerful names tried everything, and failed. But then, someone no one even noticed stepped forward. A cleaner girl, quiet, ignored, invisible in the halls of power, saw what no one else did. With a simple idea, she sparked a chain of events that not only saved a dying company, but also touched the heart of its CEO. In this video, you'll discover how it all unfolded, every twist, every secret, every lesson. Welcome to your channel name. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for stories that inspire and surprise. Before we talk about the miracle that turned everything around, we must understand the storm that came before it. Every redemption arc, every tale of survival, begins with despair so deep that hope feels like a distant dream. And in this story, the company at the heart of it all went from a symbol of greatness to a cautionary tale, collapsing under the weight of its own mistakes. In its glory days, this company was untouchable. Its headquarters were more than just a building, they were a fortress of innovation. Glass towers, bustling with thousands of employees, reflected the sun like a beacon of prosperity. Investors flocked like moths to a flame, confident that their money was not just safe but destined to multiply. Products rolled off the assembly line and flew off the shelves. Advertising campaigns became cultural phenomena. Boardroom strategies became case studies in business schools, and every headline in the financial papers seemed to carry the company's name. It wasn't just about numbers, it was about pride. Workers wore the company logo like a badge of honor. Families bragged about relatives who worked there. Rivals watched in frustration as this empire carved its way into new markets, setting standards that others scrambled to follow. For years, success was the only language spoken in those hallways. But before we talk about the downfall, remember this. Success has a way of planting seeds of complacency. Victories breed overconfidence. And when leaders stop listening, when they stop questioning, the decline begins silently long before the fall becomes visible. The cracks started small, a missed opportunity here, a failed project there. Executives dismissed them as minor setbacks, convinced the company's legacy would carry it through. But those cracks widened. Expansion into unfamiliar markets drained resources faster than expected. Risky acquisitions piled up debt without delivering returns. The once efficient supply chain grew tangled in mismanagement and bureaucracy. Departments stopped working in harmony, and silos replaced teamwork. Before we talk about the financial collapse, imagine the shock of shareholders as quarterly reports turned from black to red. Losses mounted first in millions, then in billions. The company tried to mask the crisis with flashy announcements and ambitious promises, but reality refused to bend. Debt became a monster. Interest payments swallowed profits. Creditors circled like vultures, demanding answers, demanding repayment. Big investors, once the backbone of the empire, started pulling out. Some did it quietly, others with loud public statements that rattled markets and shook confidence to its core. The stock price, once a crown jewel, tumbled relentlessly, day after day, erasing decades of wealth in weeks. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere turned suffocating. Before we talk about the cleaner girl's role, you must picture these meetings in detail. Men and women in sharp suits sat around polished mahogany tables, their eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, their voices hoarse from arguments. Every gathering began with tension and ended with despair. Proposals flew like daggers: cut costs, restructure, sell assets, lay off staff, but each idea felt like trying to patch a sinking ship with tape. Panic crept into every corner of the building. Middle managers worried about their jobs. Employees whispered in elevators about looming layoffs. Rumors spread faster than memos, and morale sank like a stone. The once proud workforce came to the office not with excitement, but with fear of pink slips, fear of unpaid bills, fear of being abandoned by the very company they had helped build. Executives, too, were crumbling under the pressure. Some resigned quietly, unable to withstand the scrutiny. Others clung desperately to their positions, hoping for a miracle that never came. Consultants came and went, charging astronomical fees for strategies that looked polished on paper but collapsed in practice. Each failed attempt only deepened the despair. Before we talk about the CEO's breaking point, imagine his reality. Nights spent staring at spreadsheets glowing on laptop screens, numbers swimming into chaos. Days filled with calls from angry investors, from partners demanding answers, from board members pressing for results. His once confident stride through the office was replaced with a heavy, weary walk. The man who had once been hailed as a visionary now looked like a captain trapped on a sinking ship, steering toward an inevitable wreck. The outside world smelled blood. Media outlets published scathing headlines. Industry on the brink. Billions lost in corporate meltdown. Investors flee as empire crumbles. Analysts on television dissected every failure, every misstep, with brutal clarity. Competitors, once overshadowed, now surged ahead, capitalizing on the chaos, and the company's reputation, its greatest asset, shattered. Customers lost trust. Partners hesitated to sign contracts. Even loyal employees stopped defending it in conversations with friends and family. The empire had not just fallen, it had crumbled in the public eye. Before we talk about the miracle to come, let's sit in this moment. Every pillar of strength had collapsed. Leadership had failed. Strategy had failed. Money had failed. Investors had failed. Consultants had failed. Even the rank and file, paralyzed by fear, had failed to rise above the chaos. It was as if the company was cursed, trapped in a downward spiral no one could break. The truth was brutal but undeniable. Everyone failed. No one saw a way out. Before we talk about the miracle that turned the company's fate around, we must step away from the boardrooms, the balance sheets, and the investors' panicked phone calls. To truly understand what happened, you need to look not at the top floors of the glass tower, but at the quiet, forgotten corners where no spotlight ever reached. Because while the executives were drowning in reports and strategies, there was someone moving silently among them, unseen, unnoticed, yet absorbing everything. She was the cleaner girl. Her mornings began before the sun rose, when the city still yawned itself awake and the streets were wet with dew. She would arrive at the building carrying a modest bag, her uniform simple, her shoes worn. The guards barely looked up as she swiped her ID card, the beep of entry blending into the background noise of the revolving doors. To them, she was routine, a shadow that slipped in and out without importance. Inside, she moved through the empty halls like a ghost. Her tools were ordinary mop, cloth, spray bottles, but her eyes missed nothing. She dusted the desks before the executives arrived, wiped away the rings of coffee cups left after late-night meetings, and straightened the chairs that still carried the tension of yesterday's arguments. Her presence was invisible to those who mattered in titles and power, but her mind was sharper than anyone guessed. Before we talk about the idea that would eventually change everything, we need to understand her character. She was not the kind of person who sought attention or applause. She carried herself quietly, her head slightly bowed, her tone always respectful. Yet behind those modest eyes lay an intelligence honed not by degrees or fancy titles, but by life itself. She came from hardship, from a world where survival depended on paying attention to details others ignored. That same skill followed her here, into the company's crumbling empire. As she worked, she observed. She noticed the things no one else had the patience or humility to see. In the storerooms, she saw stacks of inventory lying in disorder, boxes mislabeled, some forgotten entirely. In the offices, she noticed files piled on desks, mismatched data printed on reports, numbers that didn't add up even to her untrained eye. In the hallways, She overheard conversations, frustrated whispers about shipments gone missing, complaints about late deliveries, confusion over records that never matched the reality on the ground. Most people, wrapped up in their roles, walked past these signs, but she lingered. She pieced them together in her mind, quietly, like assembling a puzzle no one else knew was scattered on the floor. She didn't need access to spreadsheets or investor calls. She saw enough in the chaos left behind after each day. And then there was her perspective, different, unassuming, yet piercing. Where the executives looked for grand strategies and multi-million-dollar solutions, she looked at the simplest things: the broken lock on a storeroom door, the outdated software on an office computer, the pattern of delivery trucks idling outside for hours because of disorganized schedules. To the board, these were invisible details. To her, they were flashing signals of a much deeper rot. Before we talk about the exact moment she snapped her fingers with realization, let's pause to see the rhythm of her days. Each evening, as she gathered trash bags heavy with discarded drafts and scribbled notes, she often skimmed through the papers. She couldn't decipher every financial term, but she recognized inconsistencies. One document would mention figures that clashed with another. A delivery log would note items that never appeared on the shelves she dusted. The company was bleeding not just from debt and investors leaving, but from the tiny leaks no one bothered to seal. And because she was unseen, she had the privilege of listening. Executives brushed past her mid-conversation, assuming she was deaf to their words. She wasn't. She absorbed everything. Late at night, when board members stormed out of meetings, she walked in to clean and found whiteboards half erased, with equations and flowcharts that told the story of desperation. She studied them quietly, trying to connect what she saw with the disarray she noticed elsewhere. That's when it began to crystallize, the realization that the company's collapse wasn't entirely due to outside forces. Yes, investors had fled. Yes, debt had piled high. But beneath those towering problems was something smaller, more insidious: disorder, carelessness, a blindness to the basic foundations that kept the machinery running. And then, one evening, as she stood in the storage wing with a mop in hand, she noticed it again: rows of untouched products, piled haphazardly, some already expired, others mislabeled beyond recognition. She froze. Her heart raced. That was the moment, the snap of her fingers. The realization burst into her mind like lightning in a storm. The empire wasn't failing because it had no solutions, it was failing because the people in charge were too high up to see the ground. They missed the patterns, the details, the truths hidden in plain sight. And she, invisible though she was, had seen them all. Before we talk about the big idea that would change everything, we need to pause and imagine the weight of silence she carried. Every day she walked through the chaos of the company, carrying in her head 1,000 unspoken observations, 1,000 invisible threads no one else cared to connect. It wasn't that she had access to hidden secrets. No, what she had was sharper. She had clarity. Where the executives drowned in numbers, she saw patterns. Where managers lost themselves in jargon, she noticed the obvious. The company's heart was bleeding, and no one wanted to look at the wound. They kept throwing money, plans, and presentations at the problem, but none of it stuck. To her, the solution was simpler, smaller, but frighteningly clear. Her idea wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of breakthrough that made headlines or impressed investors. It was something more humble, almost embarrassing to say aloud in a room full of men in suits. She realized that the rot began with disorganization: warehouses filled with mislabeled stock, shelves stacked with forgotten products, expired goods hidden behind shiny packaging. It was all loss, silent and invisible. Delivery trucks wasted hours because schedules weren't tracked properly. Data in reports didn't match reality on the ground. Managers argued about shortages while hundreds of items sat untouched just a few rooms away. And so, in her mind, a proposal took shape. Reorganize everything. Start with the stock. Fix the data. Change the process. Build order where chaos had lived for too long. Before we talk about how she dared to speak this idea, picture the room she cleaned every night after long board meetings. Whiteboards covered in arrows, circles, numbers too large for the human mind to truly feel. Debt restructuring, investor outreach, cost cutting. The words were grand, too grand. And yet on the floor below, she had seen simple boxes marked urgent gathering dust, waiting for delivery. Her big idea was both laughable and revolutionary. She wanted to begin with the basic, but there was a risk, a huge one. Who would listen to her? She was a cleaner. To them, she had no voice, no authority, no seat at the table. If she spoke, she could be laughed at, dismissed, or worse, fired for overstepping. And yet, silence weighed heavier. The more she saw, the harder it was to keep her head down. Every trash can she emptied, every storeroom she mopped, reminded her that the company wasn't just collapsing. It was collapsing because no one had the courage to admit they'd lost control of the small things. Before we talk about how she executed her plan, imagine the night it began. She didn't announce anything, didn't run to the CEO with a dramatic speech. Instead, she started quietly, almost secretly. On her own time, after shifts, she began to reorganize one small storeroom. She relabeled boxes, matched them to delivery slips she found in discarded piles, and lined them up in neat rows. It was nothing grand, just a test. But when the morning staff came in, something unusual happened. A delivery that had been delayed for weeks was suddenly ready to go. The system hiccuped, in a good way. A shipment was cleared, a problem resolved. And no one knew it was because of her. Encouraged, she tried again. Another night, another storeroom. This time, she corrected the mismatched data she found on a clipboard tossed in the trash. She wrote notes, lined up numbers, and left it where the supervisor would see it. The man frowned, confused, wondering who had done it, but when he cross-checked, he realized the numbers were right. Another small problem quietly disappeared. That's how her execution began, quiet, patient, invisible. She didn't confront power. She didn't challenge authority. Instead, she proved results, one small step at a time. Each little fix was a seed planted, each corrected mistake a whisper of order in the middle of chaos. Before we talk about the day people finally noticed her, we must stay in this shadowy phase where she worked like a ghost engineer. She wasn't chasing recognition. She was testing herself, testing her belief that maybe, just maybe, the mountain could be moved by picking up one stone at a time. Every night she returned home exhausted, her hands raw from work, but her mind burning with fire. She had no laptop, no fancy tools, no managerial power. All she had were her eyes, her determination, and the courage to act when everyone else had given up. And in the silence of those nights, her big idea kept growing. Before we talk about the turning point that changed everything, we need to step back and feel the pulse of a company that had been gasping for air. Numbers on spreadsheets no longer mattered. What mattered was survival. Every week was a countdown, another investor pulling out, another supplier demanding payment, another headline whispering rumors of bankruptcy. The building itself carried the weight of despair. Hallways once buzzing with ambition now echoed with footsteps that felt heavy and hopeless. And yet, somewhere beneath all that rubble, something small had started to stir. The quiet corrections, the hidden fixes, the invisible order she had been weaving like a thread through broken fabric. At first, no one noticed, but then, the numbers began to whisper differently. The losses, which had been free-falling like a stone through water, suddenly slowed. A shipment arrived on time, an invoice finally matched the stock. A client, who had been on the verge of leaving, suddenly received their product faster than expected and placed a new order. It was tiny, almost laughably small, like sparks against the night, but those sparks refused to die. Before we talk about the shock in the boardroom, imagine the faces of managers as reports began trickling in. A warehouse that had been running at 60% efficiency suddenly jumped to 80%. Delivery delays dropped by half. Complaints from clients began to fade. No one could explain why. The managers credited themselves, of course. They said their new policies were working, or that market conditions had shifted slightly in their favor. But in truth, the transformation was already spreading quietly, seeded by hands no one thought capable of such impact. Revenue began to climb, slowly at first, like a wounded animal finding its strength, but then faster, bolder. Where the company had been bleeding money month after month, it suddenly recorded a slim profit. For the first time in years, the graph turned upward. And then came the shock. Investors who had abandoned ship began to circle back. They wanted to know what had changed. They wanted to see the miracle. They wanted to see the miracle with their own eyes. Men who had shaken their heads and walked away returned with cautious curiosity. How did this company reverse its fate? They asked, peering into boardrooms that only months earlier had been filled with arguments and despair. Before we talk about how the CEO reacted, imagine the scene when the first quarterly report of this turnaround was presented. The boardroom that once rang with anger and hopelessness was now buzzing with disbelief. Charts showed revenue climbing. Losses had shrunk dramatically. Productivity had soared. Investors were not only returning, some were offering more money than before, desperate not to miss out on this revival. The CEO, who had carried the weight of shame and near defeat on his shoulders, sat back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the numbers. He had begged, he had strategized, he had fought, but never had he expected salvation to come from such a direction. For him, the company's turnaround was a miracle with no name. Before we talk about how they discovered her role, let's stay in this moment of awe. The board members applauded themselves. They congratulated each other. Some whispered about visionary leadership, others about bold decisions, though deep down they knew no such thing had truly occurred. But facts were facts. The company was rising. Something real, something undeniable, had shifted, and yet, in the background, she remained invisible. She had not demanded credit. She had not walked into that boardroom claiming triumph. She continued her work, quiet and unseen, her hands still cleaning, her eyes still observing, her mind still stitching order into chaos. But the impact of her actions could no longer be ignored. Everywhere the company turned, there was evidence of her fingerprints, even if no one realized they were hers. Before we talk about the storm of realization that would eventually break, pause here. Imagine a company where billionaires and experts had failed, but the tide began to turn because a cleaner girl dared to see what they could not. The turning point wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a slow, relentless transformation, built one corrected mistake at a time until the entire structure began to heal. By the time the world noticed, it was too late to deny. The company had been saved, not by fortune, not by brilliance at the top, but by the courage and persistence of someone no one had ever thought to listen to. Before we talk about the moment the CEO realized her value, we need to understand the silence that often surrounds victory. Numbers rose, charts climbed, and investors clapped their hands with delight. But behind all the noise, there was still a question burning quietly in the heart of the man who had once been ready to give up everything, who was truly responsible for this miracle. The CEO had long believed in brilliance measured by titles, by degrees, by power displayed in boardrooms. He had sat across from billionaires, advisors, financial wizards who claimed they knew the way forward, but all of them had failed him. Now, as the company rose from ashes, he began to notice threads that led elsewhere, invisible patterns woven not in the office of executives, but in corners no one paid attention to. Before we talk about their first real conversation, imagine the moment he saw her not as just the cleaner, but as someone different. He entered the warehouse late at night, restless, searching for answers. And there she was, mop in hand, sleeves rolled, yet her eyes were not on the floor she was scrubbing. They were fixed on a clipboard, on numbers that no one had thought she would ever bother with. He paused. At first, confusion, then curiosity. Why was she studying inventory sheets with such focus? He asked, gently, almost awkwardly. What are you doing? She looked up, startled, then lowered her eyes, as though caught trespassing in a place she had no right to be. Just noticing something, she whispered. Before we talk about how their bond grew, linger in this scene. A CEO, carrying the weight of empires, and a cleaner girl, afraid to speak her mind, standing in the same dimly lit warehouse. For a long pause, their roles seemed to dissolve. He no longer saw her uniform, and she no longer saw only his suit. There was, instead, an exchange of humanity, curiosity, fear, and the faint spark of respect. From that moment, their conversations began to shift. At first, small and cautious. He would ask her, quietly, about the mismatched shipments she had noticed. She would explain, softly, pointing out what others ignored. And every time she spoke, he realized she saw the company not through the lens of profit, but through the lens of order, logic, and care. She wasn't trying to impress him, she was simply seeing the truth no one else dared to look at. Before we talk about the respect that blossomed, imagine the CEO returning to her again and again. Meetings with investors drained him, boardrooms filled with egos frustrated him, but when he sought clarity, he found himself wandering back to the warehouse, back to the quiet voice that spoke with honesty. It wasn't just her ideas that struck him, it was her courage to notice, her patience to fix, and her refusal to demand recognition. Their admiration grew like a secret garden, hidden from the world. He began asking her opinion more directly. She, in turn, became bolder, no longer whispering but explaining with confidence. They laughed once, over a mistake in a shipment log, and the sound startled them both, laughter in a place that had known only despair for years. Before we talk about the moment his heart shifted, feel how slowly the air between them changed. Respect became admiration. Admiration became something deeper, something harder to name. He realized that, when she wasn't around, he missed her presence. The board could cheer, the investors could shower him with praise, but none of it mattered the way her quiet smile did when she saw things finally working. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It wasn't a grand stage. It was late one evening, papers spread across his desk, exhaustion heavy on his shoulders, when she appeared with a suggestion. She leaned over the numbers, showing him a flaw in the system others had missed, and as he watched her, the thought struck him with undeniable force: she is the reason we are still standing. Before we talk about his proposal, hold on to this realization: the CEO, a man who once believed only wealth and power could save a company, now understood that his entire world had been held up by someone no one had valued. His respect was no longer professional, it had grown into gratitude, and gratitude into something warmer, more dangerous, more profound. He began to see her differently, not just as the savior of his company, but as someone who had saved him too, from despair, from arrogance, from believing that leadership meant knowing everything. In her, he found humility, courage, and kindness. The proposal came not in the boardroom, not in front of cameras, but in private, where truth felt safest. He told her, voice steady, but eyes unguarded, "You didn't just save this company. You saved me, and I don't want to walk forward without you, not in business, not in life." Before we talk about the lessons hidden in this story, we need to step back and remember where it began: a company on the edge of collapse, surrounded by experts who claimed wisdom but delivered failure. Every decision at the top had been backed by credentials, by prestige, by years of experience, yet none of it saved the sinking ship. It was only when the most overlooked person stepped forward that transformation began. This is the first lesson: never judge worth by titles. The world often convinces us that authority belongs to those sitting at the highest seats, that brilliance must wear a suit, and that wisdom is proven by wealth. But what this story revealed was entirely the opposite. The cleaner girl, ignored by almost everyone, carried the insight that escaped the seasoned executives. Her title said ordinary, but her vision said extraordinary. Before we talk about corporate hierarchies, imagine how many voices go unheard every single day, simply because they don't come from the right office or wear the right badge. Another lesson rises from this truth: great ideas can come from anywhere. The solution that reversed millions in losses was not born in a boardroom, not scribbled on a whiteboard during an executive retreat, not delivered by a high-paid consultant flown in from abroad. It was born in observation, in the patient eyes of someone who cleaned floors but noticed the rhythm of a warehouse better than those who managed it. Innovation, sometimes, is not about expensive strategies, but about seeing what is right in front of everyone's eyes. Before we talk about genius, we must admit that genius often hides where no one bothers to look. And here comes the third lesson, one that carries weight for every leader. Leadership is not about talking the loudest, but listening the deepest. The CEO's turning point was not when he ordered, commanded, or demanded. It was when he stopped, asked, and listened. Before we talk about power, understand that true power often lies in humility, in admitting you do not have all the answers and being open enough to hear those who may. The world respects strength, but it is humility that saves it. There is also a quieter, more human lesson that flows beneath the others. Value people, not positions. In a world obsessed with status, money, and hierarchy, this story reminds us that the heart of every organization beats in its people. A janitor, a clerk, a driver, a receptionist, their eyes see truths that executives may overlook. Their ideas can carry the seed of transformation if only someone chooses to believe in them. Before we talk about success, we must talk about value, and not the kind measured in salaries or stock prices, but in the potential each human carries. The Cleaner Girl's journey showed that greatness is not about where you stand, but how you see. She saw details no one else cared to see, dared to voice them, and quietly acted when no one else had the courage. Before we talk about innovation, remember that it is not always a loud announcement. Sometimes, it is a soft correction, a small shift, a patient adjustment that builds into something unstoppable. The CEO's growth holds a mirror to us all. At first, he looked only to those who mirrored his world, polished resumes, powerful investors, voices with weight in society. But the real answer came from someone invisible in that world. His lesson became our lesson. Respect is not earned by money, but by truth. Admiration is not granted by title, but by action. Before we talk about the future, pause here. Imagine how many companies, families, and communities could be saved if only those at the top chose to listen to those at the bottom. Imagine what possibilities open when we stop asking what's your title and start asking what do you see.